Military equipment, fighters, and other impressive machines have always drawn the attention of enthusiasts. Yet there are aircraft whose stories are difficult to trace simply because very little information about them has survived. Among these obscure cases is the large and rather ungainly Dornier Do-Y, with apologies to its creator, Claudius Dornier, for such a blunt description. Developed in the early 1930s, reconstructing the history of such machines can be a genuine challenge for the researcher and a pleasant discovery for the curious reader. Dornier aircraft from the 1920s were present in the Yugoslav Air Force to some extent, and even today the country still operates the later Dornier Do-28. This story focuses on the three-engine Dornier Do-Y, created specifically for the Yugoslav Air Force. Only a few of these aircraft were built, yet for the next decade they were a familiar sight in the country's skies. Despite their small numbers, the Do-Y models played a notable role in the Royal Yugoslav Air Force. One way or another, the career of the Dornier Do-Y both began and ended in the land where this unusual aircraft left lasting impressions. What follows is a reconstruction of its history based on the scarce surviving information. After the First World War, experts were surprised by the scale of aviation development. The successes of this new weapon seemed incredible and ensured its further development. Theorists such as the American Mitchell and the Italian Do-Y viewed the role of aviation in future conflicts as large combat formations of multi-seat, multi-engine combat aircraft that would destroy the enemy's rear areas, communications, and suppress the morale and will to resist of the civilian population. Aviation became an important weapon of human cruelty. In short, an aircraft for all purposes. In the early 30s, the Royal Yugoslav Air Force represented a formidable force. According to the military yearbook published by the League of Nations, it consisted of 800 combat biplane aircraft created between 1927 and 1932, such as Potez 25 and Breguet 19. Nevertheless, these machines were already outdated, and the time had come to search for more modern and more powerful bombers. To increase the effectiveness of its bomber aviation, the Royal Yugoslav Air Force Command decided to acquire large and therefore multi-engine aircraft. Yugoslav aviation experts were impressed by the idea of having heavy bombers capable of reaching designated targets without problems and destroying them with a hail of bombs. Thus, in the midst of debate, which soon involved the national press, the search for a multi-seat combat aircraft began. In 1931, concrete steps were taken and 3 pairs of aircraft of this type were acquired. 2 Aviafokker F-39 were reasonably purchased, mainly through the Little Entente, the coalition of Yugoslavia, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. A production license was even purchased, although these machines were never used. Then came 2 Dornier Do-Y, acquired at the same time as 2 Junkers G-24. These 4 aircraft were acquired as compensation for war damage, and they met certain criteria. For standardization considerations, all these aircraft were to have the same 420 horsepower Gnome-Rhone Jupiter engines, which were built in Yugoslavia under license and were already installed on aircraft of various types. The aircraft characteristics were expected to be very similar. The aircraft were to be tested, and based on their results, the best ones would enter service with bomber aviation units. Arriving in Yugoslavia in 1932, the aircraft of 3 types were put into operation during that year. After the First World War, aircraft designer Claudius Dornier moved to Switzerland to avoid the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles on the German aviation industry. This move allowed him to develop aircraft of all types. Claudius Dornier quickly became known for his multi-engine aircraft, including the giant flying boat Do-X assembled in Altenrhein. The Dornier Company created the 4-engine Do-P in 1930, the Do-Y in 1931, and the Do-F in 1932. Nevertheless, some dates of the development and manufacturing processes are unknown to the author. The Dornier Company began developing a 3-engine aircraft in Manzel in 1930, and representatives from Yugoslavia expressed interest in purchasing this type of aircraft. On May 21, 1931, when the prototype had not yet flown, the Yugoslav government confirmed its order for 2 units, financed through war reparations. The new aircraft received the designation Do-Y, with the Y standing for Yugoslavia. Work on the second aircraft of this type began shortly after. The first prototype built in Manzel, factory number 232, made its first flight on October 17, 1931, taking off from Friedrichshafen-Löwenthal airfield. The second aircraft, factory number 233, followed soon after. During subsequent testing at Altenrhein, several problems were identified related to flight stability, slight vibration, and especially overheating of the Jupiter engines. The following modifications were carried out at the manufacturer's workshops located nearby. The forward section of the aircraft was modified. Instead of Gnome engines, Jupiter engines manufactured in Germany were installed. Various types of cowlings and exhaust pipes were tested. Two-blade wooden propellers were replaced with two-blade metal ones. A complete set of military equipment was installed except for machine guns. By this time, the provisions of the Versailles Treaty were either being ignored or simply circumvented. For example, Dornier tried to sell his aircraft to Germany by presenting it as a transport or passenger plane. The Do-Y was offered to the Luftwaffe, which was still secret at the time, but without success. Dornier then offered the aircraft to other countries. The two aircraft received test numbers D3, factory number 232, and D6, factory number 233. The machines were demonstrated in Hungary, Romania, and Austria, but despite all efforts, Claudius Dornier failed to attract any buyers except the Yugoslavs. In late 1931, Captain Hinko Hubel, representing his government, participated in acceptance trials conducted at Lowenthal Airfield. Shortly after, the 450-horsepower Bristol Siemens Jupiter 6 engines were replaced with 420-horsepower Gnome Jupiter 6 engines manufactured under license in Yugoslavia. In early 1932, both aircraft were sent to Yugoslavia. Captain Hubel was aboard one of them. On January 10th, the machines departed from Friedrichshafen, flew over Innsbruck, and completed the leg at Vienna-Aspern. After refueling, the aircraft took off and, flying via Villach and Zagreb, arrived in Belgrade. Soon after arrival, German and Yugoslav technicians resumed testing and installed military equipment on board. The two giants were assigned to the 6th Bomber Regiment based at Zemun, the official international airfield of Belgrade. The two Do-Y aircraft joined other experimental bombers, the F-39 and G-24, in the multi-engine flight of the 6th Zemun Regiment. The unit, commanded by Captain Hubel, had semi-official status. In addition to commanding, Hinko Hubel also served as a flight instructor on the Do-Y. During the year, other pilots were trained to fly these aircraft and then became instructors themselves. Compared to the biplanes operated in those years, the large Do-Y had advantages in being able to carry a significantly larger bomb load and having considerably better equipment and more powerful defensive armament. Nevertheless, flying such aircraft was not within everyone's capability. The Do-Y proved to be the most difficult to control. Specially selected future pilots were to be assisted by Czechoslovak and German instructors. In May 1933, the unit officially became the three-engine aircraft group of the 6th Bomber Regiment, with Captain Hubel as commander. Then, in September 1933, the 261st three-engine aircraft group was created, which was to include 2 squadrons according to the Table of Organization. Major Zdenko Gorjup was appointed to command the group. Captain Gavros Skrivanic became commander of the 426th Squadron, and Captain Milivoje Misovic became commander of the 427th Squadron. The shortage of heavy machines was compensated by single-engine aircraft. The unit was partially independent, and its activity was essentially experimental. On September 20, 1933, during a visit by Romanian Prince Nicholas at an air parade organized for the occasion, 6 aircraft accompanied by Avia BH-33 fighters flew in a single formation, with one Do-Y in front and another in the rear. 2 days later, the prince and his entourage flew on 2 Do-Y aircraft. That same month, aircraft number 232, piloted by Lieutenant D. Kneselak, flew to the training bombing range located at Bela Crkva. 1934 was marked by constant training of Dornier Do-Y crews, who completed numerous flights across the entire country. But since the aircraft still had no weapons installed, bomb racks and armament were not fitted, the flights were limited to flight training and navigation. On October 15, 1934, at the funeral of King Alexander I, 6 heavy bombers flew to Zagreb Borongaj airfield to join the procession. The next day, they provided escort for the funeral train from Zagreb to Belgrade. On October 18th, 2 pairs of bombers departed from Belgrade to Topola. The Dornier Do-Ys, together with 2 Goliath 24s, 2 Yugoslav Fokker 39s, and 3 Czechoslovak Fokker 39s, escorted the funeral procession from Belgrade to St. George's Church in Oplenac, the burial place of the Karađorđević dynasty. The 1935 reorganization of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force led to changes for the heavy bomber unit, which was removed from the 6th Air Regiment and became the separate 261st Tri-Motored Aircraft Group. Its personnel and equipment remained the same. That same year, the Dornier Do-Ys received bomb racks and machine guns. Installing the weapons increased the crew from 5 people to 7. The aircraft designation also changed with the number 7 now mentioned, just as on the French aircraft. In autumn, the fully equipped Dornier Do-Ys successfully participated in maneuvers. The aircraft armament brought a small change to the unit's name, which became the separate 261st Tri-Motored Bomber Group. 1936 was marked by numerous flights over the country's territory. For example, on July 5th, the Dornier Do-Ys flew the route Zemun to Sarajevo to Zemun, taking 1 hour 45 minutes to fly to Sarajevo and 1 hour 10 minutes for the return flight. On August 12th, 2 Goliath 24s and 2 Dornier Do-Ys performed a demonstration flight over the main base of the Yugoslav fleet located in the Bay of Kotor. The intensity of flights is evidenced by the fact that in the second half of 1936, the 426th Squadron pilot Lieutenant Ivo Ostric completed 36 flights in aircraft number 232. That same year, both squadron commanders changed. Captain Milutin Dostanic became commander of the 426th, and Captain Kosta Simic became commander of the 427th Squadron. On September 6th, the tri-motored aircraft participated in a large air parade honoring Regent Peter's birthday, during which the Dornier Do-Ys held the pole position. At year's end, a document describing the organizational structure of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force stated that the group consisted of 2 squadrons, each with 6 3-engine aircraft on their roster. Most likely, this was wishful thinking, since only 6 machines were actually in service. In reality, the main command of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force had included in the group 2 Dornier Do-Ys that had not yet been delivered, more on them below, thus bringing the total number of heavy aircraft in the group to 8. The best way to learn about the state of Army readiness in peacetime remains maneuvers or other annual exercises. Nevertheless, in accordance with the practice of those years, aviation remained a supplement to ground forces. The exception was the King's Cup competitions held from 1926 to 1936, in which, however, only flying units participated, not the entire Air Force. These competitions were more like sporting events than full military exercises. In 1936, General Milutin Nedic organized large-scale aviation exercises planned for late summer. For this purpose, the 2 squadrons of the 261st Group were distributed between the northern and southern forces. At that time, the tri-motored bombers were distributed as follows. The 426th Squadron included the Dornier Do-Ys and the Avia Fokker 39, number 102, while the 427th Squadron consisted of the Goliath 24s, numbers 967 and 968, and the Fokker 39, number 101. It should also be noted that all tri-motored aircraft were in combat readiness and active service. During the exercises, these aircraft were divided into 3 squadrons. The northern forces with 2 Goliath 24s were based in Kraljevo, while the southern forces consisted of the 1st, 2 Fokker 39s, and 2nd, 2 Dornier Do-Ys, heavy bomber squadrons, based in Skopje and Niš-Midoševac, respectively. However, General Nedic hesitated, and the exercises were postponed. Meanwhile, General Nedic was replaced by General Dusan Simonovic, who had absolutely no desire to take the initiative in conducting any air maneuvers. Thus, the tri-motored bombers lost the opportunity to participate in serious exercises and met the war in this state. Encouraged by the sale of 2 aircraft to Yugoslavia, Claudius Dornier instructed his design bureau to improve the characteristics of the 3-engine aircraft. With the goal of obtaining orders, Dornier even began production of additional aircraft, but no contracts followed. However, Dornier did not lose heart. The already manufactured components were transferred to workshops located in Swiss Altenrhein, and in 1935, construction began on 2 aircraft with new engine nacelles, works numbers 555 and 556. It should also be noted that contrary to what was published, the factory in Altenrhein was responsible for manufacturing the engine nacelles, installing the engines, assembling the aircraft, and obtaining flight certificates for the Dornier Do-Y modified. Everything else was manufactured by the Dornier Company in Germany. The new version of the Dornier Do-Y modified aircraft differed somewhat from the original variant. Due to vibrations caused by turbulence, the span of the elliptical wing was reduced from 92 feet to 87 feet 4 inches, resulting in the wing area decreasing from 1,194 square feet to 1,171 square feet. The chord length and relative thickness of the wing profile also changed. The nose section of the fuselage was redesigned, and metal stiffening elements were installed on the outer parts of the wing. Nevertheless, the most important changes were related to the installation of new engines, 625 horsepower Gnome-Rhone, 9 Kurz motors, turning 3-bladed metal propellers. These engines favorably distinguished themselves by the installation of much more streamlined NACA cowlings. During tests conducted in Switzerland, the improved aircraft showed higher performance. Maximum speed increased to 186 miles per hour, and the machines climbed to 13,100 feet in 12 minutes 5 seconds. Dornier spent much time and resources, 500,000 Reichsmarks, on improving his aircraft, but commercial results in Germany were disappointing. The attempt to sell the aircraft, which received the designation Dornier U in the variant of passenger transport, failed. Because of its constant instability in flight, which was undoubtedly related to the placement of the engines and obsolescence, the Dornier Y did not interest the Germans, as was stated in 1935. After unsuccessful attempts to sell the aircraft in Germany, Austria, Hungary, Romania, and Switzerland, the 2 aircraft were ultimately offered to Yugoslavia, which already had 2 machines of this type. However, the German government had already refused to make payments for war damages, and tough negotiations were underway between the manufacturer and Yugoslav representatives. At the end of 1935, both sides signed an agreement for the acquisition of 2 Dornier Y modified aircraft. In November 1935, a Yugoslav commission visited the Dornier Company factory with the goal of acquiring spare parts for the already purchased Dornier Y aircraft. Simultaneously with the acquisition of spare parts, commission representatives were able to observe the production of the 2 other machines, which was completed by the end of the year. In early 1936, both aircraft completed the required volume of tests demanded by Swiss authorities, and on July 1st, test pilot Voth completed state trials. On July 6th, an application was submitted for obtaining an airworthiness certificate. Administrative and technical bustle continued until February 20th, 1937, including payment of duties and other taxes, export licenses, and so on. The compiled documents allowed each of the aircraft, which received temporary Swiss civil registration numbers HB-GOE and HB-GOR, to fly to Yugoslavia with 1 pilot and 5 passengers. A temporary navigation permit was issued in Bern on February 25, 1937, and was valid until April 30, 1937. Before delivery of the aircraft, Lieutenant Dimitrije M. Knezelak traveled to Switzerland to perform training flights. Knezelak's flight log contains a record of a flight in aircraft number 555 at an altitude of 328 feet, the purpose of which was to measure speed. The next day, he performed the official acceptance flight. The aircraft was supposed to climb to an altitude of 26,247 feet, but due to engine overheating, the machine stopped climbing at 20,669 feet. Therefore, it is quite likely that after this flight, some modifications were undertaken. On March 8, 1937, 2 Dornier Y modified aircraft, one of which was piloted by Fath, performing a flight to Belgrade, landed in Vienna Aspern. The aircraft refueled and the next day departed for their destination. Sometimes a visit by the aircraft with registration number HB-GOE to Vienna Aspern on March 22nd is mentioned. This flight was organized for the purpose of returning German technicians. The 2 German machines were quickly incorporated into the roster of the 261st Group, and the crews had no problem mastering them. On the morning of March 12th, Yugoslav Prime Minister Milan Stojadinovic, accompanied by many officers and officials including General Simovic, visited Zemun airfield. The Prime Minister expressed a desire to fly on one of the new Dornier aircraft, number 555. The airplane flew to the capital to the maximum satisfaction of its passengers. On March 27th, after a visit to Yugoslavia by Italian Foreign Minister Count Tiano, his Savoia 79, with civil registration number I Roma, was escorted by 2 Dorniers, the most modern Yugoslav aircraft. In August 1937, 1 Dornier became unfit for service. During Army maneuvers held in September 1937, 5 squadrons participated, one of which included 2 Dorniers, 2 Aviafokker F-39s, and 1 Junkers G-24. In October, 2 old Dorniers were sent to Kraljevo for technical repairs. The problem of importing spare parts delayed the repair work. Both aircraft received new 480 horsepower Jupiter 9AA engines. At the end of 1937, only 3 Dorniers were in service, and one of the 2 old Dorniers was still unavailable. On January 1, 1938, the Yugoslav Air Force was reorganized again. The 261st Group became the 81st Independent Bomber Group. The commander remained Major Gavro Skrivanic, who was soon replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Hinko Dragic-Hauer. The 426th Squadron became the 261st and the 427th became the 262nd. 3 Dorniers remained in service, and their retirement was planned for the end of 1939. Also on January 1st, the 7th Air Regiment was transformed into the 7th Bomber Air Regiment. The 3 components of the former 7th Air Regiment, the 201st, 102nd, and 233rd Groups, were transformed into 2 bomber groups and 1 separate 52nd Fighter Group. However, the latter had no fighters available, as the group was equipped with reconnaissance aircraft. The 164th Squadron was armed with Breguet 19s, and on August 19th, the 163rd Squadron received 2 Dorniers and 1 G-24. Soon, 3 or 4 Caproni 310s joined these machines, followed by 1 or 2 Savoia 79s. All aircraft were equipped with dual controls. After spending some time in Mostar, the old 3-engine aircraft were transferred to Zagreb, the G-24, and to Kraljevo, 2 Dornier. As of August 18, 1938, 3 Dorniers were in service, of which only 1 was a newer model, but on August 26, 4 aircraft of this type were again listed as being in service. In 1939, 4 Dornier aircraft spent much time in the workshops of the 6th Air Base at Zemun. In May, numbers 5555 and 5586 underwent serious modifications. They received the latest Yugoslav-built IAM Nome K9 engines. Number 5555 also received an Ascania semi-automatic pilot system. Machine number 232 was equipped with a station for performing blind flights, and on number 233 only the engines were replaced. In June of the following year, all 4 aircraft were equipped with blind flight equipment. The aircraft underwent numerous repairs during which the fabric covering of the tail surfaces was tightened, engines were replaced, and so on. The appearance in September 1939 of the more modern Savoia 79s moved the old Dornier to the second line for more peaceful tasks. Soon, the 81st Group received the Savoias and the Dorniers were distributed to other units. In autumn 1939, the Royal Yugoslav Air Force underwent another reorganization, which, however, was not as large-scale as the previous one. The Aviation Observer School was transferred from Novi Sad to Pančevo, near Belgrade. It was planned to create the first flight training group, consisting of 3 squadrons intended for training cadets, studying to be pilots and observers at the new flight school. However, in early 1940, the 81st Group still used the Dorniers transferred from Mostar, especially number 556, formerly 3234, which was operated until May 1940. In summer 1940, 2 Dornier were transferred to the Pančevo Flight School for training observers and preparing cadets. During summer exercises held in the Mostar area, the Dorniers were still used. For some time, the 3rd and 8th Regiments used the Dornier for training in navigation, bombing, and shooting. These large aircraft were also used as liaison and transport planes. In fact, the Dornier were used alternately by virtually all units. In early 1941, the Flight School and Aerial Observer School were transferred from Pančevo to Sarajevo. 2 remaining unneeded Dornier Y aircraft were sent to Kraljevo. The use of old 3-engine aircraft in the transport role is often mentioned, but it should be kept in mind that before the April 1941 war, transport units were not organized mainly because these units were seriously underestimated. Other reasons were the lack of funds and appropriate equipment. However, in the late 1930s, it was planned that in case of war, aircraft and crews from the national airline company Aeroput would be mobilized. This plan provided for the creation of a transport group that would include 2 squadrons. Each squadron was to consist of 7 transport and 3 light aircraft. These units could count on the possible use of old F-39 bombers temporarily used in the parachute school. In addition, if necessary, it was planned to allocate G-24 and Dornier Do-Y aircraft. The start of the war on April 6, 1941 barely affected the Dornier Do-Y, whose status at that time was uncertain. Although aircraft of this type were planned for use as transports, there is no confirmation that they were under the control of the transport group. There is no data about flights performed in April. This is not surprising since the Dornier Do-Y had long been obsolete. These three-engine aircraft were in poor condition. The aircraft were in the possession of the aviation enterprise located in Kraljevo, the old Breguet factory, where they were on public display. After careful study of the condition of the aircraft, specialists proposed converting them into transports. However, the start of the war did not allow the necessary work to be performed. German documents devoted to captured Yugoslav aircraft were prepared on May 20, 1941. In them, 4 Dornier Do-Y aircraft were listed in Category 4, which included machines in poor condition. As is known, captured aircraft were either used by the Germans, put into storage, or transferred to Germany's allies. Croatia acquired 1 restored Dornier Do-Y. The restoration of the aircraft was carried out through cannibalization. 3 aircraft served as sources of spare parts, after which they were sent for scrapping. Traces of the only Croatian Dornier Do-Y appear in 1942, when this aircraft was assigned to the 9th Squadron of the 3rd Air Group, stationed at Sarajevo Air Base. In addition to the Dornier Do-Y, which received number 1601, the squadron included single S-791 and F-39 aircraft. Unfortunately, the relationship between Yugoslav and Croatian numbers is unknown. The career of the Croatian Dornier was very short, and the reason for this was not combat operations but the lack of spare parts. In 1943, the aircraft disappeared from the lists of Croatian aviation. In the summer of 1944, its wreckage was placed at Rajlovac airfield to deceive enemy reconnaissance aircraft. The Dornier Do-Y was supposed to represent the only Croatian Amiot 143. Although the role of the Dornier Do-Y turned out to be not so significant, putting these aircraft into service was an important step forward for the Royal Yugoslav Air Force. Together with other 3-engine aircraft, the Dornier Do-Y allowed crews to be trained in flight operations by the time more modern bombers were received. Well equipped, these aircraft allowed crews to be trained in radio navigation and blind flying. Of all such aircraft, the Dornier Do-Y were the most impressive. According to estimates, more than 40 pilots and 70 people in other specialties were trained in the 261st Squadron. Despite the large number of hours spent on repairs, a total of 800 flights were performed on the Dornier Do-Y with a total duration of 1,200 hours. After 10 years of service in Yugoslavia, the story of this aircraft of monstrous appearance, distinguished by both its 3 engines and their placement, was closing forever. Its appearance was gradually forgotten, and only some accessible archives made it possible to write an article about one of the least-known aircraft of the famous Dornier Company, the Dornier Do-Y, or Ypsilon, as Yugoslav pilots called it. Originally, the Dornier Do-Y was designed as an aircraft for transporting cargo and passengers. At the request of the Yugoslavs, the original purpose of this aircraft was changed. They planned to use the machine as a bomber. The Dornier Do-Y was a monoplane of metal construction with a high-mounted cantilever wing. The wing had a semi-elliptical shape and consisted of 3 sections, each of which connected to the fuselage. The wing's structural framework was metal and consisted of ribs and 2 spars. The skin was mixed and consisted of metal and fabric. To accommodate the engine nacelles, the outer parts of the wing center section were reinforced. The 3rd engine was mounted in a nacelle installed above the wing center section and supported by 2 pairs of N-shaped struts. The ailerons had a metal structural framework, fabric skin, and were equipped with garden bench-type compensators. In those years, these compensators were widely used by German aircraft manufacturing companies. The wing center section housed 2 fuel tanks with a capacity of 276 gallons each. Each engine nacelle contained an oil tank with a capacity of 18 gallons. The aircraft's fuselage was a monocoque metal structure with a square cross-section. The skin was made from aluminum sheets. In the forward, partially glazed section of the fuselage was the bombardier's station, who also performed the functions of observer and gunner. The pilot's cockpit was a 2-seat open cockpit equipped with dual controls. Access to the aircraft was through a door located under the pilot's cockpit. Behind the pilot's cockpit was the radio operator station, who also performed the functions of upper machine gun gunner. Under the radio operator station was the bomb bay. The aircraft's flight engineer was also located in the upper turret. When the Dornier Do-Y received a full set of military equipment, 2 crew members were added to the crew as gunners, whose tasks were to service the machine guns located in the upper and lower gun positions respectively. The main landing gear struts were non-retractable. Each strut consisted of a main support equipped with a hydro-pneumatic shock absorber connected to the wing center section. 2 axle halves at the connection point formed a V shape and connected the strut to the fuselage. The wheels were partially covered by fairings, which, however, due to the condition of airfields in those years, were used quite rarely and were more often removed completely. The tail wheel was connected to the rudder installed in the rear section of the fuselage. The tail assembly structure was identical to the wing structure except for the use of fabric as the skin. The elevators and rudder were equipped with garden bench type compensators. The first 2 Dornier Do-Ys were initially equipped with 3 450 horsepower Bristol Siemens Jupiter 6 engines, turning wooden 2-blade propellers. Shortly before delivery of the aircraft, the wooden propellers were replaced with metal ones. Later, before or shortly after delivery, the engines were replaced with slightly less powerful 420 horsepower IAM Industria Avionskie Motora / Gnome Roan 9 AD engines, which were license-built Jupiter 6 engines. It is believed that for standardization purposes, these changes were made in 1932 or 1933. In 1937, these engines were replaced with 480 horsepower Gnome Roan 9 AE engines, which also equipped some Dornier Wal aircraft of the Yugoslav fleet. The Dornier Do-Y modified were equipped with 625 horsepower Gnome Roan 9 Kurs engines, turning 3-blade metal constant-speed propellers. These engines were equipped with NACA cowlings. 2 years later, these engines were replaced with 600 horsepower IAM 9 Kurs engines, which were manufactured at the factory in Rakovica, a suburb of Belgrade. Armament. The aircraft's offensive armament consisted of a bomb load with a maximum weight of 3,086 pounds. Bombs in the bay were mounted vertically. The aircraft initially used bomb racks of Dornier design and later of Yugoslav design. The bomb load could consist of the following options: 5 220-pound bombs, 10 220-pound bombs, 6 220-pound, and 4 441-pound bombs. Some of the bombs were locally produced by Stankovic. Defensive armament consisted of a total of 7 7.7mm Darn machine guns. In the nose of the aircraft was a T-07 turret with twin machine guns. Each machine gun was equipped with 1 main and 6 spare magazines, each with a capacity of 200 rounds. A second T-07 turret was located in the upper part of the fuselage, and in addition to the main magazine was equipped with 8 spare magazines. 2 machine guns were installed in the sides of the fuselage, however, photographs do not allow their exact location to be clearly determined. Finally, a single machine gun was installed in the lower part of the fuselage for firing in the prone position. In addition to the main magazine, it was supplied with 4 spare magazines. There were calculated time standards for installing an additional machine gun for firing in the lower part of the fuselage, but in practice this was not implemented. It should be noted that the Dornier Do-Y in total carried 27 magazines with a total ammunition load of 5,400 rounds. The total weight of the ammunition was 551 pounds. The Do-Y were gradually equipped for blind flying. The aircraft were fitted with a Telefunken 2S7F transceiver, a Telefunken Spets 173N radio direction finder, and photographic equipment from Nadesco or Erneman companies with a focus of 10 or 20 inches. Photographs could be taken in 5 by 7 inch or 5 by 9 inch formats. When used as a transport aircraft with armament removed and crew reduced to 3 people, the Do-Y could carry an additional load of 3,300 pounds or 10 passengers. Finally, it should be noted that in Yugoslavia, the Do-Y received 4 windows on each side of the fuselage under the wing. While most characteristics of the Do-Y are known, some of them still generate speculation. This is not surprising considering the various modifications that included engine changes and installation and removal of different equipment. After consultations with some engineers or other qualified people, one must accept some of this data with great caution. Over a decade of service, the Do-Y changed its paint scheme and identification markings several times. The first aircraft were painted entirely in a pearly white color, while later examples carried a light gray finish. During tests in Germany and Switzerland, the planes received temporary markings. After their arrival in Yugoslavia, these were replaced with factory numbers, which were applied to the wings, fuselage, and rudder, along with the aircraft's name. In August, Yugoslav national roundels were added to the wings, and the rudder was repainted in national colors. It also carried the aircraft's name, number, and the date it entered service. Later, Yugoslavia introduced a system of designations that indicated how many crew members the aircraft carried and whether it served as a day or night bomber. In the late 1930s, new regimental numbers began appearing on the fuselage sides. These were later updated again, using a system in which the digits showed the aircraft's type, its role, and its individual serial number. Shortly before the outbreak of war, camouflage patterns were applied to Yugoslav aircraft, including the Do-Y. The upper surfaces received irregular patches of brown, green, and ochre, while the undersides were painted in a light shade. The pattern was different on each aircraft, and the national insignia were reduced in size. Confusion over the aircraft's name began during its early period in Switzerland and Germany. At times, it was referred to as the first series of Do-Y, which led to the assumption, never officially confirmed, that a second series existed. To avoid misunderstandings, it is best to follow the classification used by the Royal Yugoslav Air Force, which distinguished between the standard Do-Y and its modernized version. Even within Yugoslav service, the aircraft was not always referred to consistently. It appeared in documents as Do-Y, Do-Y, or D-Y, but the most common spoken name was Do-Y,